With serious injuries to Brandon Aiyuk, Chris Godwin, and Mike Evans, the waiver wire is full of opportunity more than ever this week, and we help you make the tough decisions on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. And when I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, we are officially through all the Week 7 games. And last night, it brought us a lot of fantasy points from the quarterbacks, at least in the Buccaneers and Ravens game. And Kyler Murray had a good game as well for fantasy. But it also brought us two devastating injuries, especially to Chris Godwin, who has a dislocated ankle, or I don't know what happened. It was disgusting, but it looks like he's definitely going to be done for the year. Mike Evans tries to play through a hamstring, gets a touchdown. Awesome. But he hurts his hamstring so much worse because he keeps trying to play through it. And it looks like it's going to be a long lasting injury before he can come back. And we had the official news that Brandon Aiyuk is tore his ACL. He's going to be out. So a lot of injuries to figure out here, especially with the waiver wire prepping for Week 8. But just to hit on last night's game, we got the Baker Mayfield experience, right? He got his 27 fantasy points, quarterback 2 on the week, behind only Lamar Jackson, who he's playing. Started off rough, but ended with 370 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, he found other guys to throw to, namely the backs. I mean, getting Rashod Bateman and Bucky Irving involved. And then Cade Otton had his first 100-yard game of the season. He had a team-high 10 targets. The second leading target getter was Jalen McMillan, once all that stuff cleared with Godwin and Evans, but not very efficient. Only 15 yards receiving. He had 11-yard rush in the game. But he wasn't prepared to start, so now he will be going forward. He will have a key role. They'll also get Trey Palmer involved. So these are probably your starters going forward. Palmer has had some flashes, but they've mainly used him as a red zone guy. But McMillan's interesting. He was part of that Washington trio from last year, including Romeo Doubs and Jalen. They all got drafted in the NFL. So they have that talent. McMillan at times was the best of that group for his team in college. And he was a priority guy that they drafted, and they really liked him in training camp. So he's going to have to step up. There's nobody else here. This matchup against the Falcons is beatable, so that's where you have to go, I think. Sometimes you don't need to look too far, right? I think you look right at the next guy, and McMillan would be it for Tampa. Then you look in San Francisco. Let's hope Jauan Jennings comes back. If Jauan Jennings comes back, we know what he's done before, right? When these guys have been hurt, he's totally got off, and he has the total trust of Brock Purdy. So if he's number one, he should be rostered, period, regardless of his status. If he can't return against the Cowboys, it's a bummer, but I think he'll try to play now, given it not only Aiyuk is down, Debo's in the hospital, George Kittle is day-to-day. So a lot of concern here with this passing game. So the next thing, Michelle, I will ask as a 49ers enthusiast after the Steelers, Jacob Cowing has been getting a lot of rave reviews. He's another rookie from the 4th round. The first-round pick, Ricky Pearsall, just returned from that unfortunate incident of the offseason. Now, where are you going? How are you feeling it after Jennings in this offense if you had to go somewhere else, assuming Samuel and Kittle could also be out?
It's Jauan Jennings. I mean, if Jauan Jennings is playing, he's the guy. We already seen him have a huge game when Deebo Samuel was out earlier. When Deebo's back, this is going to be Deebo's offense again. Christian McCaffrey is supposed to make his way back after their bye week. So those are going to be the two guys that get a ton of targets along with Jennings. Ricky Pearsall will be out on the field. We'll see how productive he can be. I'm rooting for him like no other after coming back from being shot where he should have been honestly like not alive right now. 50 days later, he plays in the game. He plays 75% of the snaps because he has to, because everyone else is hurt. It didn't turn into anything. Now it was a tough defense against the Chiefs, and it was his first ever game in the NFL. So there's He could be heavily involved, but Kyle Shanahan is not a fan of rookies. Like Brandon Aiyuk didn't get going in his rookie year until he was the last viable option at all. There's still a lot of other viable options in this offense. So I'm going to go Jennings there. Going back to the Tampa Bay injuries with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I really think at this point, the only guys that are going to see a bump up is Cade Otton, who we'll talk about in our next segment in our priority pickups. And then also Rashod White. I mean, he had 71 receiving yards, 6 targets, 2 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns. Also, Bucky Irving got involved as the receiver with 54 receiving yards. So it's probably just going to be a heavy tight end running back targeted offense with these, Trey Sterling Shepard and McMillan kind of getting targets in between.
Yeah, they have to throw to them at some point because they have to try to function with their offense. It's not like the Dolphins who just stopped running their offense when their quarterback got hurt and just didn't try to do that. So you're right. There'll be a lot of shorter throws because you don't have that natural field stretcher the way that Evans was. It actually hurt their passing game quite a bit for a lot of that game. But once the Ravens started backing off and they had a lead, then all that stuff opened up. So that's my one concern with that. But Rashod White is going to have a lot of value now. As a pass catcher, you figure it's getting clear here now that he's healthy. Sean Tucker's just a backup. Bucky Irving is the kind of rushing back. And then Rashod White's going to see a massive role in the passing game, as you mentioned, going forward. But Cade Otton, he's available in a lot of leagues, folks. So go get him, as well as Hunter Henry. Those are probably the tight ends that need to be owned and rostered at this point. McMillan, again, should be an afterthought. Otton is the first guy you want to get, especially if you're hurting at tight end.
Yeah. And just to kind of get through the rest of this night from last night, Zay Flowers was hurt early in the game. He played through the injury, but on his first catch, he rolled his ankle pretty bad. It looked like it was going to be a bad injury. He kept playing. He did nothing after that injury, though. Rashod Bateman, on the other hand, 121 yards and a touchdown. We're going to talk about him as a possible priority pickup in our next segment. Mark Andrews comes down with 2 receiving touchdowns. Still only playing 54% of the snaps, but he's getting touchdowns. That's what we want to see. 41 yards, 2 touchdowns. We'll take it. 3 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., though, in the other game, doing nothing. He's doing absolutely nothing these last 3 weeks. He has scored 4.6 fantasy points, 0. Now he got a concussion in that game, but still 3.6 fantasy points. He hasn't had a good game since week 2 and when he had 1 good quarter, and he didn't have another catch after that quarter. I think you have to sit Harrison for a little bit until he shows something. Especially they get the Dolphins next week. They have a tough secondary. Jalen Ramsey, I don't want to play Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I mean, you just want to keep playing him if you have to, but he's now relegated to being wide receiver 3 at best. I mean, Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson, for some reason, there's not the chemistry developing yet. We thought there was a chemistry early in the season between Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison, but it hasn't really manifested in the games in which both of them have been healthy. So I don't know what to do. I think you just don't want to leave him dangling on your bench when he has that ability to go off, because we know the talent is immense, and we know the Cardinals want to make it a point of getting him the ball at some point. So I don't know. The Dolphins secondary is a little bit daunting, and if you've got better options, I think you can pivot. But I think now you just have to consider Harrison as a wide receiver 3 on your team. And we think about it, we're thinking about him as a surefire wide receiver 1 after week 1, and now we're really down on him. So things can change in a hurry. So hopefully you have some better options, but you may not because of all these injuries that are happening. And now you lose another deep threat. Jameson Williams is out for 2 games as well. So wide receiver attrition is hitting us everywhere, Michelle.
Yeah, Jameson Williams gets suspended the next 2 weeks due to PED. Maybe that's why he's been good this year. I don't know. But he had a bad game this last week. He's going to miss the next 2 games. I'll say their schedule after he comes back is really juicy, so with some high scoring or bad defenses against the Texans, Jaguars, and Colts. So after a bad week and suspended the next 2 weeks, if you have a really good team and you don't need depth, this might be the time to go trade for him now. But in the meantime, these next 2 weeks, I mean, Tim Patrick has been involved. Maybe he steps up. Maybe Sam Laporta, though. That's what we really want. Get Sam Laporta some targets, because ranking him this week, I had him all the way down at tight end 14. Now with this Jameson Williams news, I'll bump him up a bit, but I would love to see, instead of saying, okay, we're going to go to Tim Patrick, let's go to Sam Laporta. They shouldn't really need to pass all that often, though, against the Titans, so it might just be a Lions running game this week.
Yeah, I think it's good news for Amon-Ra St. Brown, because he hasn't just been the alpha that we wanted to all throughout because of Jameson Williams and his presence. Last week we had a Cleve Raymond reappearance for a touchdown. And so, look, I'm not going to trust Raymond or any of these guys, but you're right. You could throw exactly back to the offense we had without Williams with St. Brown. The problem is the Titans are very tough on tight ends, so this isn't the greatest matchup for Sam Laporta to get going, but I love St. Brown this week to really build on that. I think Jared Goff is going to go into some old habits, and that means peppering St. Brown with targets. So there's some options there, but yeah, it's a little tougher this week. You have to navigate through. At least we do not have buys, so that's a good thing. Yeah. But we will get into our top waiver wire priorities after we take a quick break and maybe tie them again back to these wide receiver injuries. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It is about to be the halfway point of the season, week 8.5 in the NFL. Well, there's a lot of action still left to go. That means all the way through the playoffs and the big game. NFL fans, you can continue the second half of the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game at midseason, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. That's easy to follow and track all your bets on FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 as well in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet with FanDuel. That's only at FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals who are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals who can't be found anywhere else, even those who are actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role in a new organization. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you would be looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 88% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional only on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier for you as well. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even quicker. 2.5 million small businesses trust and use LinkedIn for hiring. You should be one of them as well. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. It's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, Michelle, let's look at the waiver wire priorities here that we're going to look at, and some related to what we just talked about. And the three guys we have, Caleb Williams, some people dropped him during the bye. I don't know why. He had his biggest game before facing or after facing the Jaguars. He gets the Commanders this week, a good enough matchup. Romeo Doubs, I think we pivoted quickly to Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson, but Doubs looks like he's locked in with Jordan Love. And then you have Alexander Madison. Tough matchup this week, but still a starting running back.
Yeah, you got to check for those three guys. I know they're probably taking a lot of leagues, but Williams is still available in 50% of leagues. Dobbs is only rostered in 37%, and Madison 43%. So just check your waivers. We're not saying they're going to be there. We get it. You probably play in a more competitive league than that, but you never know. So go check them. Now, if those guys aren't available, we got to get into some deeper players here. We hit on really quick the 49ers players, but really let's talk about that. Jauan Jennings or Ricky Pearsall. I said I would prefer Jauan Jennings, but do you think Ricky Pearsall offers more upside, or would you just go strictly the Jennings route here? If he's on waivers, right? He might be rostered because of what he did earlier in the year. But if they're both available, where are you going, Vinny?
Yeah, I think you definitely have to go Jennings because at least Aiyuk is going to be down for the long term, right? But beyond this week, with whatever happens to Deebo Samuel, hopefully he gets well soon. They do have a bye next week, and they could potentially rest George Kittle in this game, and they have a bye, so they would give him a couple weeks off to get fully healthy, knowing that Christian McCaffrey could also return for that game. So there's some strategy at work here for the 49ers, but I think the real question is for the short term, like, is it Pearsall or Cowling, right? I think Jennings for sure. I don't know if I want to trust either of these rookies, right? They're rookies, as you mentioned, with Kyle Shanahan. I think it's a bit of a reach. I think Jennings is a smash spot. I don't know if the Cowboys is a matchup where I want to try either of the rookie wide receivers, unfortunately. So let's see how it plays out, right? If Debo has to have a longer issue, then we'll see how like the targets play out between Conley and Pearsall. See if someone else steps in, right? Lonnie Bell, he didn't look all that good, but he might be in the mix.
No,
So who
if
knows?
he's in the
He's
mix, I'm
not.
going to stop watching that team.
Yeah,
Roddy
yeah.
Bell needs
We
to
don't want that because Brock Purdy and him do not have a good connection. So let's just say that. But yeah, Jennings would just be smashing it every week. I think he would become an every week wide receiver play should he just seamlessly be healthy and play for Aiyuk.
Yep. If Jennings is healthy, he's the number one guy there.
Yeah.
Especially like we don't
Purdy trusts
pneumonia.
him too, so that's good.
Debo's in the hospital with pneumonia. Like
Yeah,
that's something that's going to mess with your lungs for
yeah,
quite a long
yeah,
time. I mean, I
yeah,
know he's going to have like top-notch medical care because that's,
yeah,
he has the money and he's in the
yeah,
NFL, but still
yeah,
that's not an injury you want to, or that's not an illness you can mess with. So definitely you would expect him to be out this week. Then he gets the bye week. Maybe after that he'll be ready. But yeah, Jauan Jennings is a huge pickup this week. Top priority for me. Pearsall's just kind of you're going for it, right? You're taking a
yeah.
swing and you're hoping, but like he's not a guy you can really trust to plug in anytime soon. Now there's 4 guys here. I want you to rank them. So Keon Coleman had a big game for the Bills this last week with 125 yards, and he got his most playing time since week 2. And then you have Cedric Tillman, finally got his opportunity with the Browns, the Amari Cooper gone, and had a great game. 12 targets, 8 receptions, 81 yards. Now he gets Jameis Winston or Rashod Bateman, who has had back-to-back weeks where he's involved in this offense. He's been scoring touchdowns as of late. Zay Flowers is a bit banged up, or Jalen McMillan, but I think we'd all have him fourth. So really go Keon Coleman, Cedric Tillman, Rashod Bateman, rank those guys.
Yeah, McMillan, we got to see what we get, right? And his usage has to come through. Now, I think Keon Coleman for the rest of the season I like a lot, but I'm not a big fan of the Seahawks matchup just because you do have some tough corners, mainly in the slot there that Khalil Shakir is going to have to worry about with Devin Witherspoon, but they've got some size on the outside. So I don't love Keon Coleman this week. I think you exploit the Seahawks a lot better on the ground. I like Tillman this week, but I put Coleman over Tillman there for the longer term. Tillman, the matchup is so good. The Ravens allow the most points to wide receivers. We know that. He's clearly their top wide receiver like David Njoku this week. So Jameis Winston could get it done with both those guys. Then Rashod Bateman, again, we'll see how long the Flowers injury lasts. Like, I would not be interested in playing Bateman, however, if Flowers is healthy. I just don't think you can go there because Bateman is just so sporadic with his production. I know he's valuable in certain games, but it's not like they're playing just an easy walkover defense, right? The Browns seems to be the only thing they have going, some defensive players. So that's how I would look at it. For longer term, I think I go Coleman, Tillman, Bateman. For short term, Tillman, Coleman, Bateman.
So this is the thing with Zay Flowers, though. I'm a little bit worried about the injury because, yeah, I know he played through it, but that's when adrenaline's still going. That's when it's still warmed up, right? As soon as you let that thing sit overnight, has it flared up? Like, I don't know. We'll have to see his practice reports. But if Flowers is out, Bateman, it does become a pretty good play for that time. However, in 3 of their next 4 weeks, they play the Browns, the Broncos, and the Steelers. Not great matchups for wide receivers. So he's on the lower end here for me. I think I would actually go Cedric Tillman for just the upside. I really like Tillman coming out of school. 3rd round rookie last year. He was great at Tennessee. And then, Jameis Winston will throw it up. And he got all the targets last week. There's no one else in that offense besides him and David Njoku. I don't care about Jerry Jeudy or Elijah Moore. So I'm going Cedric Tillman, actually, who gets the Ravens this week. Then hard matchup against the Chargers. But love that. And then Coleman, I know he had that huge play, but Amari Cooper is going to take the majority of targets there. So I am going to go Tillman, then Coleman, then Rashod Bateman. And then Jalen McMillan is a flyer. But again, it's still Jauan Jennings for me, number 1.
Yeah, by far. Yeah.
And then looking at the tight ends, because with these wide receivers getting hurt, like for Cade Otton situation, does he now become a priority pickup? Because tight ends have not been great this year. They're getting a little bit better. But would you prefer Cade Otton to pick up or Hunter Henry, who we've been talking about, who's been really great with Drake May?
Yeah, I think Hunter Henry is more the complete focal point of the offense, where you mentioned the backs could be involved. I think they're pretty close to me, right? The only difference is who's going to score more. I would say Henry probably has a better chance of scoring more, but then I think Otton might be more involved consistently in targets all over the field. So I think both these guys should be rostered, picked up. The tight end landscape is bad. Or at least we had David Njoku return. It started to get better, actually. with some disappointment, but these two guys are certainly in the mix for every week plays going forward. I just think they're trusted by their quarterbacks. And one stat that I pointed out why I like Cade Otton before the season as a bit of a sleeper, Liam Cohen had the same situation with the Rams just a couple years ago when Baker was there filling in for the game, right? They had wide receiver injuries. Where do they go a lot? Tyler Higbee. So the same situation is developing here, so go there. And Henry, look, the other receivers come and go, but Henry is the one guy, that security blanket that Drake May is going to trust. And actually the Jets, very good matchup. They gave up some points to the Steelers tight ends last week.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they're going to keep being banged up in the secondary, it's not as scary. And we're going to talk about that matchup because we're going to get into the best streaming quarterbacks, tight ends, and defensive options this week. But with the quarterbacks, there's 3 interesting quarterbacks on waivers right now. And then there's also Drake May, who's might be the most interesting, but he has the hardest schedule coming up. So we're going to get into that and try to figure out where we would rank those guys when looking at waivers this week. We'll finish up today's episode right after a quick break. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. I have used it for any time I'm going to a baseball game, going to a football game, going to a concert, and it truly is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You get a panorama view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what you're going to see when you get there. There's no surprises. It takes a matter of seconds to buy tickets. I'm a super impatient person, so this is great for me. But literally 2 taps and you're set. And then they have the best ticket coverage in the business in case anything goes wrong. It's always a worry when you're going to buy tickets. Like, oh, what if something happens where I can't go this day? Or you don't have to worry with Game Time. They have event cancellation protection. They have 24-hour return guarantees. They have job loss assurance. That's huge. So you really just get to take the worries and the guessing work out of buying tickets when you use the Game Time app. All you have to do is download that app, the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, you create an account on the Game Time app, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, that's LOCKEDON NFL, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. We have 4 very interesting options on majority of waivers out there. So you got Tua Tagovailoa coming back. I hate saying his last name. Don't make me do it again. I'm going to keep calling him Tua. We have him coming back, and it's against the Cardinals, which randomly the Cardinals are sometimes a good defense, sometimes not. Who knows? Yeah. Drake May, who's been really good for fantasy his first 2 starts, really solid. He's looking like a good thrower, but gets the Jets this week. We have Russell Wilson. Was the quarterback 3 in fantasy this week, and he gets the Giants, a nice matchup. Or Jameis Winston coming into his first start in a long time with a new team, but against the Ravens, who are giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. Which of these 4 are you going with long-term and for this week?
Yeah, the long-term answer is easy. It's Tua. He's attached to the 2 best receivers who can change things. I mean, Tyreek Hill and Jalen, that's his ticket to scoring. And this Dolphins team, look, I think they could be bad down the stretch, and it could be a high-volume passing that comes through. So just because he has those receivers, right? Now, the next answer might surprise you. It's Russell Wilson. I just like the way he's operating that offense, and it's close between those 2 guys. I think they're borderline QB 1-2s that I can look at. Then I look at Drake May. He's got some upside, we know, in better matchups. I don't think he'll be terrible this week. I don't think he's startable, however, against the Jets. Then Jameis Winston scares me, right? There's a little bit of volatility there. Like, I think he can compile and put up numbers, but I could also see a scenario where he has like 250 and 2 and like 3 interceptions and a lost fumble, something that makes his line ugly. So I'll just be wary on Winston. I know the matchup and the numbers say this is the best matchup for quarterbacks, but just be concerned. There's a little bit of rust, and it could show up right away. I don't think he's going to be as super subby as Joe Flacco was last year.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like Winston's a fun option. I think he helps the receivers there and David Njoku, but I can't trust him
Yeah,
as a fantasy
right,
quarterback. It's
right.
actually been a while. I mean, it's not like when he was with the Saints, he was this great fantasy quarterback.
Yeah,
He doesn't have the best of weapons. And like, yeah, he gets a nice matchup this week against the Ravens, but he's probably going to be rusty, probably going to throw interceptions. And then he gets the Chargers after that in a bye. So not a great next 3 weeks after this Ravens one. For Tua, I actually don't really care to grab him. I mean,
Mhm.
it's how long has it been since he's really had a good fantasy week? It's been since week 8 of last season, where he's even scored more than 19 fantasy points. So he's just kind of a middling quarterback. I'm not dying to get him unless you're just.
That's fair.
I
Yeah,
don't even know what scenario you would have to be in to get him because it's not like it's not like we're
yeah,
dealing with a ton of quarterback injuries.
no,
My number one would be Russell Wilson. He was a very playable, streamable, and last year with the Broncos without weapons. He gets the Giants this week. Great matchup for him. The Giants are very bad against play action, very bad against the deep ball. Those are two things Russell
yeah,
Wilson thrives at. And then he does get a bye, which stinks. But after that, gets the Commanders and the Ravens. So it should be high scoring games. So I go with Russell Wilson first, then Drake May, then I guess Tua, and then Jameis Winston. But I don't really care for Tua or Winston. So my two best options would be Russell Wilson first, then Drake May.
yeah. You make a good point about Tua. Like he sometimes can have a nice floor, but his ceiling is limited. And he's just been like a consistent QB2, right? Where Russell Wilson has a little bit more upside. So you make some good points there. Now, how about this week? I mean, you mentioned Winston, you mentioned Wilson, but I think a better quarterback play this week is Bo Nix. He's just rolling, man, and he's running like nuts. Like talk about cheat code quarterbacks who've been so focused on Anthony Richardson. This guy is putting up the numbers we want out of Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I mean, he only put up 14 points last week because he didn't score any
Yeah,
touchdowns. I
that's the
think that would
problem.
be my biggest worry. This
Yeah,
is a good matchup. The Panthers are allowing the fourth most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season.
yeah.
And he, like you said, he's running a lot 61 rushing yards and 75 over the last 2 weeks. He should have that again. My worry is that
Yeah,
Javonte
give me a
Williams and him
touchdown.
can just run.
Yeah,
And Williams steals the rushing touchdowns again. And then he ends up with, 150
that's
passing yards.
yeah. It's a tough one. I mean, those are tough, right? When the team is dominating, do they get a play action touchdown in the red zone? Do they get a rushing touchdown from their quarterback? You're just looking for two, right, in that scenario, and sometimes it can be hard to come by. And yeah, I get what you're saying, but the matchup against the Panthers,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's amazing.
they let Marcus Mariota be a top 10 QB off the bench, by the way, after Jane Daniels had like a 50-yard something run. So he came in relief and was a top 10 quarterback. So
I'm gonna have Bo Nix ranked as a top 16 guy this week. I do
yeah,
like him.
yeah,
I had
yeah.
him here as a top streaming option. He has scored 19 points in 3 of the last 5 games. Like we've seen him be a decent fantasy quarterback as of late,
Mhm.
and he's gonna run. So it just comes down to can he get a passing touchdown? Like just really one is all we need, and that's gonna get him to 18 points. And if he gets
Yeah.
multiple passing touchdowns, it could be a great week. So Bo Nix is definitely an option as well. Moving to tight ends, we had Will Disley have a huge night last night. 11 targets, 8 receptions, 81 receiving yards against the Cardinals. They get the terrible Saints defense next week. There's not a lot of great streaming options at the tight end position. If Cade Otton's not out there, if Hunter Henry's not out there, obviously those two guys would be your top 2 picks. But if they're not out there on waivers, I think Will Disley might be your next best get.
Yeah, we'll have to see what the injury looks like. I mean, he was helped by no Hayden Hurst, no Quentin Johnston, but he had done nothing before then. But we also know it's Greg Roman. He was thrown to the tight ends like nuts on Monday night. So you look at this matchup against the Saints, it's beatable for sure. I mean, they're decent, but again, I think you can easily take it to them this week. So I do like that. Disley is probably going to get some volume, and he's had some flashes before, right? With Seattle, he's a guy that's capable of being a good, productive pass catcher. We know that when healthy. So, yeah, I like him. I think another guy I would look at is Jatavion Sanders. I just think he's been coming on, and really he's been the Panthers' passing game as limited as it's been the past couple of weeks. And the Broncos, you can't really throw on their corners. They have really good corners. Pat Surtain should return from his concussion this week, but you can't throw on them with the tight end. So it's not going to be great, but you got to take what you can get this week because, again, Otton and Henry are probably not going to be streamers. They're probably going to be just managed and kept, and played in several weeks.
Yeah, but again, if they're out there, then
Yeah, you
you're picking them up and you're playing them over Will Disley. But I
Right.
like that Jatavion Sanders call. And then also like the next 3 weeks, the Broncos, if like you said, you can pass on them with your tight ends, not your wide receivers. And you get the Saints, who we're talking about, is a nice matchup for Will Disley, and then the Giants. So if Jontavian Sanders snaps continue to trend up, then and Andy Dalton stays out there, he could be a good PPR play, especially. And then one last tight end here I want to bring up. It's a total wild card, but this is if you're playing in a really deep league and you're really desperate for a tight end. Darnell Washington was on the field for 53% of the plays last week. Russell Wilson did look to him quite often, but had 4 targets, only 36 yards, didn't have a big fantasy day, but he looked good, and Russell seemed to really like him.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this about the Arthur Smith history, right? He typically likes to run the 12 personnel with the 2 tight ends.
Remember Jonnu Smith killing Kyle Pitts last
year?
year?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say that's going to happen to Pat Freiermuth. No, he did have a nice catch downfield, right? The one-handed grab he made, but he's more of a downfield threat, actually, I think. Where Washington's maybe a short area place, and the Giants' pass rush is not terrible, right? They could get to them a little bit with Dexter Lawrence and have Russell Wilson kind of get rid of the ball. They also have some other young guys who can get to the quarterback. So that could help, right? It was a lot of short passing to him. I think Freiermuth, in a weird way, might be their, quote, field stretching tight end, and they're like high leverage plays. But in terms of the volume that they might need, I think you look at that as well. So what we saw from Wilson, a lot of shorter passes and some deep shots to Pickens when he wasn't doing that.
Yeah, and when we get into our wide receiver rankings, I have a feeling Pickens is going to be ranked pretty high for both of us. But to end today's waiver wire show, because Pickens is not on the waiver wire, let's get through some streaming defenses in case you're looking for that. The Lions might be out there. They're against the Titans this week. The Titans love the second most fantasy points per game to opposing defenses. The Lions defense still, I know they let 29 points up against the Vikings, but they still looked good without Aiden Hutchinson. So I think the Lions would be my number one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they'll be out there in a lot of leagues too. I think they were like 80% available because they haven't been good, but they're playing the Titans, who give up the most fantasy points, period, in 2024. So they're the easy pickup. I think you can also look a little bit at the Dolphins. Kyler Murray is still sloppy a little bit with protecting the ball. You can also look, obviously, the Chargers again. If people were disappointed, they were okay, but not spectacular last night, but they were playing the Saints. And I think maybe look at the Texans, right? Would you like them as well? Anthony Richardson is not that good, and they're playing at home this week.
Yes, and again, as we reminded you last week, check for the Vikings.
Always
because
check for the
they are
Vikings.
still, no matter what, it doesn't matter. They give up points and yards. They get turnovers, and now they get the Rams this week. Matthew Stafford loves to throw interceptions. So for some reason, I was able to grab them everywhere last week because they were
my MVP in one league. So I can
that would be number one, and then the Lions, and then there's not really too many other great options out there besides those. But that is it for today's episode. Thank you to all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, we're going to start our Week 8 rankings on tomorrow's show. We start with our running backs and quarterbacks, as always. And then on Wednesday, or on Thursday, actually, we'll get to our tight ends and wide receivers. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.